Hey friends, Dean here. Before we get you on to your episode, I want to take a moment to invite you to our next virtual online trivia night. Wednesday, May 13th at 8 p.m. Join us either on our Facebook group or on our YouTube page for 3 rounds of fun trivia, music questions, movie questions, general knowledge questions. It'll be a fun time and a chance to win some prizes and have just a good relaxing night of some trivia at home. You don't even have to go out for it. So don't forget, Wednesday, March 13th at 8 p.m. Join us on our Facebook group or YouTube for 3 rounds of fun virtual online trivia. We'll see you there.
In this quick hit, we're talking about the long and the short of it. Well, the longest and shortest number one hits, that is. Stay with us.
You're listening to a 3324 podcast quick hit with Dean Legiro, where Dean shares stories and trivia about his favorite chart hits, actors, movies, and more.
Welcome, friends, to this week's 3324 podcast quick hit. You're here with Dean Legiro. Thank you so much for joining us. It means a lot to us. You can find us on social media. We're at 3324 podcast on Instagram and Facebook. Full-length music and movie episodes come out every Thursday, so join us there, won't you, as well? So this week, I thought it would be fun to take a look at some chart activity from pop singles that were the shortest in length and ones that were the longest in length. So we'll start with the short ones first. Mainly the reason why pop songs were so short back in the 60s and 70s is because the song length was largely determined by the size of a 45 RPM single, which the radio stations would play the song from. That could only hold a certain amount of time on one side, so most groups were bound by that. So you had what was called the 3-minute miracle. That's usually what pop songs were referred to as 3-minute miracles because they got in and they got out, and that's how pop music was. Longer form music just wasn't popular and didn't hit the charts, and no one ever would think to release it just because of the limitations of the 45 RPM format. That being said, let's start with some of the shortest songs that ever hit the charts. And we'll start with, I've got 4 songs for you. All of them were under 2 minutes long. So the first one clocked in at 1 minute and 55 seconds. And all of these hit number one as well. This hit number one in September of 1967. The group was the Box Tops, and the song was The Letter. And that was, the leader of that group was a 16-year-old named Alex Chilton. And if you listen to the song The Letter, he's got a really raspy voice. That voice sounds much older than a 16-year-old, and it will fool you. So much so that Joe Cocker actually did a cover version of this song, and they sound very similar, but the original was done by a 16-year-old Alex Chilton. He would go on into the 70s to form a very popular cult underground pop group called Big Star, and that would be his next claim to fame. Moving on, in 2019, Lil Nas X and his breakthrough monster hit Old Town Road would hit number one in April of 2019. Only 1 minute and 53 seconds long. Not a very long song whatsoever. But here's a fun fact about it. That song is built around a sample of a song called 34 Ghosts 4 by Nine Inch Nails. What that means is that Trent Reznor actually has a songwriting credit for this number one hit as well, because that sample was featured in Lil Nas X's Old Town Road. Very interesting. Now, before Lil Nas X hit in 2019 with a 1 minute and 53 second song, the record stood until 1965 with this song that came in at 1 minute and 49 seconds, and it was from Herman's Hermits. And their song is I'm Henry the Eighth I Am. But when Peter Noone, the leader of Herman's Hermits, sings it, he sings it in an English Cockney accent, so the Henry is actually Enery. So it's I'm Enery the Eighth I Am. This song is actually from a 1910 British Music Hall song. It's actually quite old, but the Herman's Hermits version does not use any of the verses. This is actually they just sing the chorus 3 times, and that's the song for them. It was good enough to go to number one, and it was certainly short enough. Now, the shortest number one, you might be wondering, what is the shortest number one? Well, it hit number one in November of 1960. It was written in 1953 when the leader of this group was 15 years old. He was trying to convince his date to stay out longer than her curfew. He wasn't successful with that appeal, but the song Stay by Maurice Williams and the Zodiacs was successful enough to hit number one in November of 1960. Again, 1 minute, 36 seconds long. Not a very long song, barely enough time to actually get comfortable with it, but it was enough to get the job done, hitting number one. Coming up, we've got some of the longest songs to ever hit the charts. Now we're going to talk about some songs that were really long that hit number one as well. The first one we're going to talk about came out and hit number one in 1972. It was actually a 12-minute song on its album, but was cut down to 7 minutes, featuring an extended instrumental intro with wah-wah guitars, trumpets, a string section, building the anticipation until the Temptations take over and make this song, Papa Was a Rolling Stone, a hit of their own in 1972. It was actually a cover that was originally released by the group called The Undisputed Truth, also in 1972. That didn't do much, was recut in the same year, and the Temptations made it a classic among classics. What was the longest song up until that time? 1968 in September. Of course, who would break the barrier to have the longest song? It would be the Beatles, with hitting number one with Hey Jude in September of 1968. At the time, there was some question, would radio stations play a song this long? It was 7 minutes and 11 seconds long, and there was some concern. Again, we talked about 45s do not have a lot of room for a song of this length. Paul McCartney's response was, they'll play it if it's us. And he couldn't have been more correct that the Beatles would be groundbreakers again, with releasing what would be the longest single at that time in 1968. That record would be broken in 1972, same year as the Temptations, but Don McLean and his epic song American Pie would hit number one in January of 1972. This is a song that covers, basically it's a history class about rock and roll. It is 8 minutes and 37 seconds long. The 45 actually would have half of the song on one side, and you would have to flip the 45 over and listen to the rest of it. This would hold the record for 50 years for the longest song. The longest song to ever hit number one stood for 50 years until there was no one else. Who else could do it but Taylor Swift? And her song, All Too Well, would hit number one in November of 2021, clocking in at 10 minutes and 13 seconds. And this is from her re-recorded album called Red. Taylor Swift had some issues with her old record contract. She did not own the master. So what she started doing is going back and re-recording those old albums. So she would now retain the rights to the new recordings. So she recorded Red, re-recorded it, and the song All Too Well would be the longest number one hit at 10 minutes and 13 seconds. So there you have it. We've got the long and the short of it. Either way, if it's a quick in and out song or if it's something that's a little more extended with a lot more meat on the bones, these were all number one hits. We will make a playlist of these on our Spotify channel at 3324 Podcast. So we'll drop a link to that in the show notes. So by all means, dig into these 8 songs and enjoy them. And this has been Dean with your 3324 Quick Hit. Thank you so much. We will see you real soon.
This has been a 3324 Podcast Quick Hit. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider. So please like, subscribe, and rate to become a part of the 3324 family. Your feedback is important, so please make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 Podcast and on Twitter at 3324P to join the conversation.